In football, legends usually wear boots, but once in a generation, one wears a suit. He didn't score goals, he didn't lift trophies, but he built the platforms for others to do both. For over 2 decades, he stayed on top in a world that devours its kings, firing managers, outlasting rivals, defying critics, and still standing. A man who turned a debt-ridden club into the richest football institution in history, who signed the world's biggest stars, from Figo to Ronaldo, Beckham to Bellingham. Not just to win, but to dominate headlines, shift markets, and spark nations. He challenged UEFA in open daylight, defied FIFA in court, engineered a super league that nearly cracked the sport, and quietly rewrote election rules to make himself unremovable. This is the story of how a quiet civil engineer became the most powerful man in football. Before he became the puppet master of football, Florentino Pérez was a builder, not of clubs or teams, but of roads, bridges, and power structures. He was born in 1947 in Madrid, just 2 years after the end of World War II. Spain was poor, rebuilding, and ruled by dictatorship. In that world, young Florentino watched his country and his club, Real Madrid, rise from the rubble. His father owned a small perfume business, modest, but enough to give the family a stable, middle-class life. From a young age, Pérez was fascinated by infrastructure, the way things were made, how cities grew, how influence was built from stone and steel. He studied civil engineering at the Technical University of Madrid, one of Spain's most rigorous institutions, and graduated into a nation still recovering from isolation and poverty. But Pérez didn't just want to build roads. He wanted to build systems, power, and soon his ambitions turned toward politics. In the late 1970s, during Spain's transition to democracy, Florentino stepped into public life. By 1979, he was elected as a Madrid city councilman, rubbing shoulders with Spain's emerging political elite. Ambitious, sharp, and unusually quiet. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but always the one people wanted to impress. Still, when his party failed to win national seats in 1986, Pérez quietly stepped away from politics. But what came next changed everything. In 1983, he partnered with former political allies and acquired a bankrupt construction firm called Padros S.A. for the symbolic price of just 1 peseta. It was a gamble few understood at the time, but Florentino had a vision. That crumbling company became ACS Group, which, over the next 2 decades, would grow into Spain's largest infrastructure conglomerate. Highways, rail systems, skyscrapers. A CS was everywhere, and so was Pérez. By the 1990s, he wasn't just rich, he was connected to bankers, to ministers, to billionaires from old money dynasties, to the same aristocracy that had supported Spain's military dictatorship just decades earlier. And yet, despite all that, there was still something missing, because Florentino Pérez wasn't just a businessman. He was a boy from Madrid who had grown up in the shadow of the Santiago Bernabéu, a boy who had watched Alfredo Di Stefano from the stands, a boy whose father had made him a socio, a Real Madrid member, before he ever owned a suit. That boy still wanted to be king. In 1995, he ran for the presidency of Real Madrid for the first time, and lost. He was outmaneuvered by the sitting president, Ramon Mendoza, a cigar-smoking power broker with deep ties in the Spanish establishment. Pérez, it seemed, was too much of a businessman, too quiet, too clean. But he didn't disappear. He went back to ACS, grew even richer, built new alliances, waited, and by the year 2000, when Real Madrid was once again drowning in chaos and on the brink of financial collapse despite another Champions League title, Florentino saw his moment. This time, he came with a weapon, not a business plan, not a speech, Luis Figo. And this time, Florentino Pérez would not lose. In the summer of 2000, Real Madrid stood on a ledge. They had just lifted the Champions League, their 8th under President Lorenzo Sanz. But behind the silverware was rot, over 300 million euros in debt, a bloated boardroom full of infighting, and a financial model that relied more on miracles than management. Sanz believed the trophy would secure his re-election. After all, who votes out a winner? But Florentino Pérez wasn't interested in football logic. He came armed with a different weapon. He promised to steal Barcelona's soul. Standing before Madrid's voting socios, he made an offer that sounded like fantasy. Elect me, and I will bring Luis Figo, Barca's golden boy, Ballon d'Or runner-up, and captain, onto Real Madrid. Madrid. At first, it was dismissed as campaign theater. Even Figo, on holiday in Sardinia, thought it was a bluff, but it wasn't. Behind closed doors, Pérez had struck a legally binding agreement with Figo's agent. If Pérez lost the election, he would personally pay Figo €3 million. But if he won, Figo's €62 million release clause would be triggered, and Barcelona could do nothing to stop it. It was ruthless, calculated, and brilliant. Pérez won the election in a landslide, and 2 weeks later, Luis Figo was unveiled at the Santiago Bernabéu, showered in white confetti, while Barcelona fans burned his shirts in the streets. What Pérez had pulled off was unprecedented. He didn't just sign a player, he sent a message to rivals, to agents, to the world. Real Madrid was no longer just a football club, it was the apex predator of global football. And that transfer, it was only the beginning. Luis Figo was only the first domino. What came next wasn't just a transfer policy, it was a full-blown cultural takeover. Florentino Pérez called it a strategy. The world called it the Galáctico era. His mission was simple: sign one global superstar every year. Not just footballers, icons, ambassadors, money machines. And so the shopping spree began. In 2001, he broke the world transfer record again to bring in Zinedine Zidane from Juventus. A year later, Ronaldo Nazario, the face of Brazil and Nike. Then David Beckham, England's most commercial athlete, complete with fashion contracts, tabloid buzz, and a global fan base that stretched far beyond Old Trafford. Every player brought more than goals. They brought markets. Zidane meant France. Ronaldo meant Brazil. Beckham meant the world. When you sign a Galáctico, Pérez once said, you don't just get a footballer, you get a nation. And the numbers backed him up. In Beckham's first season alone, Real Madrid sold 1.2 million jerseys. In Madrid alone, global sponsors flocked in, TV rights skyrocketed, and suddenly, Real Madrid weren't just on the pitch. They were on billboards in Tokyo, murals in Lagos, and primetime slots in the US. Between 2001 and 2006, Real Madrid's commercial revenue tripled. But for all the fireworks, football was still being played. Zidane's iconic volley in the 2002 Champions League final, Ronaldo's hat tricks, Beckham's inch-perfect crosses, Figo still dazzling like a traitor in disguise. The Bernabeu wasn't a stadium anymore, it was a stage, and Pérez was the director. But behind the curtain, there was imbalance. Too many stars, too few soldiers. Egos clashed, defenders were neglected, and when Pérez sold Claude Makelele, the team's midfield anchor, and dismissed manager Vicente Del Bosque, the Galácticos cracked. No one defended, no one followed orders. The brand was thriving, the football not so much. And in 2006, after back-to-back trophyless seasons, Pérez resigned. But the story wasn't over, because kings don't vanish. They retreat, they study their failures, and then they return, sharper, stronger, and more dangerous than ever. 3 years passed. 3 presidents came and went. Real Madrid won a few trophies, but chaos lingered. The club was missing something, or rather, someone. In 2009, Florentino Pérez returned to the presidency, but this wasn't the same man who left in shame. He had learned. This time, he wouldn't just buy stars, he would build a machine. His opening act, €250 million spent in a single summer. Cristiano Ronaldo, Kaká, Karim Benzema, Xabi Alonso, Galácticos 2.0, but with structure, fame and function, flash and formation. And then came the masterstroke. He hired Jose Mourinho, a tactician, a warrior, a man who didn't care about shirt sales, only winning. It was bold, it was hostile, it was exactly what Madrid needed. Under Mourinho, Madrid ended Barcelona's reign of terror. They won the Copa del Rey, then La Liga in 2012, with a record 100 points. Florentino was back, and this time, he wasn't just chasing headlines, he was building dynasty. When Mourinho left, Pérez didn't panic. He elevated a familiar face, one of the original Galácticos, Zinedine Zidane. At first, it felt like nostalgia, but Zidane wasn't here for sentiment. He made history, 3 consecutive Champions League titles, something no modern manager had ever done, and behind every lift of that trophy was the quiet architect in the VIP box. He wasn't just spending anymore, he was strategizing. Casemiro, Kroos, Modric, a midfield not built on fame, but function. Sergio Ramos, Marcelo, Varane, a defensive core that could bleed and still smile. Cristiano, of course, became the spear, but the spine, that was Florentino's masterpiece. He had evolved. The man who once sold Makelele for being too simple was now building midfields that controlled Europe. Real Madrid weren't just lifting trophies, they were ending eras. Barcelona collapsed, Atletico stagnated, and in 2022, 2022, Madrid lifted their 14th Champions League. By then, there was no more debate. Florentino Pérez didn't just rebuild Real Madrid, he had reprogrammed football itself. By the early 2000s and 20s, Florentino Pérez had already achieved what most football executives could only dream of. Real Madrid had lifted more Champions League titles than any other club in history. The Santiago Bernabéu was undergoing a €1 billion transformation into a futuristic arena. The club had become a global empire, feared on the pitch and revered off it. Yet, for Pérez, it wasn't enough. He wasn't interested in resting on past glory. He had one more transformation in mind. Not for Real Madrid, but for football itself. The first hint came during a quiet, late-night interview on El Chiringuito, Spain's most dramatic football talk show. Pérez sat opposite the host, not with bombast or fanfare, but with the steady tone of a man preparing to deliver a warning. Football is dying, he said. Young people are losing interest. We have to change something before it's too late. It wasn't a soundbite, it was a mission statement. Shortly after, the world found out what he meant. In April 2021, Real Madrid, along with 11 other elite European clubs, including Manchester United, Barcelona, and Juventus, announced the creation of the European Super League, a closed midweek competition featuring the biggest teams, the biggest players, and no risk of relegation. It was designed to guarantee blockbuster matches every week, maximize revenue, and sideline UEFA in the process. The backlash was instant and violent. Fans protested outside stadiums.
Well, when I first heard the news on Sunday night, I was quite disgusted, quite honestly.
It's just that they just went and done it. They didn't even consult fans. It was a done deal.
Politicians condemned the idea. UEFA and FIFA threatened bans. Within 48 hours, clubs began to pull out one after the other. Executives resigned. Apologies were issued. The plan collapsed under pressure, but not for Florentino Pérez. Unlike the other presidents, Pérez did not panic. He didn't release an apology or walk back his intentions. Instead, he said something no one expected. The Super League is not dead. It's just sleeping. While the rest of Europe moved on, Pérez filed lawsuits. He wasn't looking for public support. He was playing the long game in courtrooms and boardrooms. In December 2023, that strategy paid off. The European Court of Justice ruled that UEFA and FIFA had violated EU competition law by blocking the creation of new tournaments. The verdict didn't just validate the Super League, it broke open the door for it to return. Florentino Pérez, once painted as delusional for defying football's governing bodies, had won a legal war that changed everything. And the truth is, he had seen it coming all along. Match attendance was declining, broadcast revenues were falling, younger fans weren't watching full matches, they were watching 5-second TikToks and 90-second YouTube highlights. Football was competing with Netflix, gaming, and social media. Pérez believed that the sport needed spectacle, not tradition. His vision for the Super League wasn't just about money, it was about survival. He wanted more Real Madrid versus Liverpool, more Barcelona versus Juventus, less filler, fewer dead rubber group stage matches. It was, in his eyes, evolution, not greed. And while the idea was met with fury in public, behind the scenes, the numbers began to echo his concerns. To most, it looked like a failed rebellion, but Pérez never saw it that way. To him, it was phase one of a bigger play. He wasn't trying to replace football, he was trying to future-proof it. And now, with a favorable legal ruling, he wasn't just back in the conversation, he was ahead of it. For Pérez, the Super League was never just about Real Madrid's dominance. It was about reshaping football to suit a changing world, and placing himself at the center of that new architecture. Once again, while others played the game, he was already redesigning the board. Florentino Pérez doesn't need to raise his voice. In a sport filled with shouting managers and viral interviews, his silence says more than most press conferences, because when he moves, football shifts. When he speaks, people listen, and when he stops speaking, something bigger is already unfolding. Take the 2023 Ballon d'Or. On paper, it was just another glittering night in Paris, but for Real Madrid fans, something felt off. Vinicius Jr., the club's electric forward, the engine of their attack in the Champions League and La Liga, was barely recognized. Not a podium finish, not a major award, just applause, smiles, and silence. Pérez never commented publicly. He didn't tweet, he didn't grant interviews, but those who understood him knew. This wasn't the end of the conversation, it was the beginning of another play, because Florentino Pérez doesn't fight battles with microphones. He fights them with institutions, with influence, with time. While pundits debated the fairness of the award, Pérez turned his attention, again, to the European football power structure. The Super League, quietly resurrected through courtrooms, had new life. Publicly, UEFA remained silent, but behind closed doors they were watching, waiting, worrying, and then there was Mbappé, the most theatrical transfer saga in modern football. Paris Saint-Germain's golden boy, France's crown jewel. One moment he was Madrid bound, the next he renewed in Paris. Millions were offered, headlines exploded, but Pérez, he never begged, never chased. He just issued a single chilling line at a Real Madrid shareholder meeting. Our doors are open, but not to everyone, and not forever. That was it. A sentence, yet an earthquake. It was a reminder that while clubs fight to convince, Pérez doesn't convince. He prepares. He waits. Because sooner or later, players understand what Madrid means, and they come, because he knows what most forget. Stars fade, but systems endure, and Pérez doesn't build for trends. He builds for legacy. As clubs scramble for headlines and panic over quarterly results, Pérez moves like a man who already knows how the story ends. He doesn't flinch in chaos. He doesn't chase the spotlight. He builds the world others are forced to play in. While football tears at itself, splintered by streaming wars, foreign billionaires, and political power grabs, Florentino Pérez has turned Real Madrid into something untouchable. Not just a club, a sovereign force, an empire with its own rules, its own gravity, and at the center of it all, not a politician, not a showman, just a quiet architect with a long memory and a longer plan. Still watching, still building, still ahead. The Santiago Bernabéu, once just a stadium, has become something else entirely. A negotiation table, a boardroom with 80,000 seats, a place where football is the backdrop, and power plays take center stage. Over the years, the VIP box at Madrid has hosted more than former players and celebrities. It's welcomed oil magnates, heads of state, and tech CEOs. It's where hands are shaken, deals are hinted at, and silence means everything. Because when Pérez invites you in, you're not just watching a match, you're entering his chessboard, and it's not just optics. When James Rodriguez signed in 2014, fresh off his World Cup heroics for Colombia, ACS, Pérez's company, closed a €690 million infrastructure contract in Colombia. The timing wasn't lost on anyone, nor was the Pemex deal in Mexico that followed Chicharito's arrival, or the Argentine toll road adjustments days before Madrid hosted the Copa Libertadores final. Coincidence? Maybe, but when it keeps happening, it becomes something else. Florentino's genius wasn't just in signing players, it was in turning every move into a multi-level transaction. Every press conference was a message, every shirt unveiling, a billboard for influence. Real Madrid became a brand. Yes, but more than that, a launchpad. From this launchpad, Pérez orchestrated one of the most ambitious stadium redevelopments in history. The new Bernabéu isn't just for football. It's designed for conferences, concerts, esports tournaments, and even indoor tennis matches. It's a future-proof structure and a money-printing machine. €100 million per year. That's the target. Not from ticket sales, but from everything else. Because Florentino understands something many still don't. The modern club president isn't just managing players. He's managing assets, territories, influence. And in this new game, Real Madrid isn't competing with just Barcelona or Manchester City. It's competing with Amazon, with Apple, with Formula One. The Bernabéu is now a tech-forward cathedral. The club is a media company. The squad is a portfolio. And Florentino Pérez, he's not a football man. He's a systems engineer of legacy, leverage, and long-term domination. He once said, "Football is not just a sport. It's the most powerful communication tool in the world." And under his rule, Real Madrid became the proof. Not just a club, a kingdom. In the game of football, most men leave their mark on the pitch. Florentino Pérez left his on the entire system. He didn't just win trophies. He didn't just sign legends. He rewrote the rules, bent institutions, weaponized influence, and built something no one else could replicate. Not because he had more money, but because he had more vision, more calculation, more patience. He turned Real Madrid into more than a club. He turned it into a fortress of soft power, a global brand, a political tool, a business empire. And he did it all without ever stepping on the pitch. His critics call him ruthless. His supporters call him brilliant. But everyone calls him something. Because you don't ignore Florentino Pérez. You study him. You watch what he does next. Because if history has taught us anything, it's this. Florentino doesn't speak often, but when he moves, the whole world shifts with him.